The fluorescent lights hummed faintly above the silent gate. Outside, snow howled across the runways of Denver International, swallowing the last streaks of departing planes. Inside, Adrian Cole sat motionless on a cold row of metal chairs, cradling his sleeping son like a fragile miracle. Noah's small body was curled against his chest, his tiny hands clutching the edge of Adrian's worn jacket. The boy's breath rose in soft clouds against the fabric, oblivious to the chaos that had left them stranded. Their flight home to Chicago had been canceled hours ago. The terminal had emptied, leaving only a handful of stranded travelers scattered like forgotten pieces of lives paused mid-story. Adrian had spent the first hours pacing the concourse, searching for hotel vouchers, food, even blankets, anything to make the night softer for Noah. But everything had been taken, every chair occupied by strangers who eventually gave up and disappeared. Now it was just the two of them and the hum of vending machines in the distance. His back ached, but he didn't dare move. After years of balancing lesson plans, side tutoring jobs, and late nights grading essays just to keep the lights on, Adrian had become fluent in discomfort. What he never got used to was seeing Noah uncomfortable. He brushed a strand of hair from his son's forehead and whispered a silent promise somehow. He would always make the world gentle for this child. A figure shifted a few seats down. Adrian hadn't noticed him before. The man wore a tailored navy suit that looked impossibly crisp for midnight in a storm. He had an air of contained energy, like someone too awake for this sleepy hour, pen moving quickly across a small leather notebook. When he glanced up, his eyes were sharp yet tired, the kind of eyes that had seen too much but refused to admit it. The man caught Adrian's gaze and offered a polite nod. "Lucas Grant," he said when Adrian greeted him, voice smooth but clipped, as if weighed down by secrets. He claimed to be an insurance worker stranded on his way to a client meeting. Adrian smiled faintly, the polite smile of someone too exhausted to question anything, and motioned to the empty seat closer to them. The air near the windows was icy. Sitting together meant sharing what little warmth the cavernous terminal had left. Lucas hesitated, then moved. When he sat, the tension in his shoulders softened just enough for Noah, still half asleep, to roll from Adrian's lap and instinctively curl against Lucas's side. It startled both men. Adrian began to apologize, but Lucas simply froze, then relaxed, carefully resting an arm around the boy, like handling something breakable. Noah sighed and burrowed deeper, trusting as only children can be. Through the long hours that followed, words came in quiet waves. They spoke about weather delays, about favorite cities, about nothing and everything, the strange, tender conversations that bloom when two lonely souls find each other in the middle of nowhere. Lucas asked about Adrian's work, and Adrian said he taught history at a public high school, a job that didn't pay much but gave him purpose. He spoke about Noah's obsession with drawing rockets, how he wanted to be an astronaut one day, and how every decision Adrian made was measured against the small compass of his son's happiness. Adrian never noticed the way Lucas watched him while he spoke, how his pen never touched the page during those moments. He couldn't see the flicker of conflict behind Lucas's calm expression, the quiet war between duty and something far more human. Because Lucas Grant wasn't an insurance worker, he was an FBI agent. And for half a year, he had been following Adrian, tracing suspicious bank transfers that had suggested money laundering, waiting for the mask to crack. But nothing about this man felt like a criminal. As the terminal sank into the hush of early morning, Adrian's head finally dipped. Lucas sat still as stone, with Noah breathing steadily against him, as if guarding the fragile peace of this small, accidental family. He told himself it was just part of the job. Yet beneath the tailored suit and practiced discipline, something inside him shifted quietly, dangerously, because sometimes the most unexpected nights become the ones that change everything. If you believe some meetings are written by destiny, follow Heart Stories and stay with us for the rest of this journey. For Lucas Grant, suspicion had once been a clean equation. He believed that numbers never lied, and bank ledgers told stories more honestly than people ever could. The story the files told about Adrian Cole was sharp-edged and damning modest teacher salary, yet deposits appearing from shell accounts across different states. Patterns that whispered of laundering, of buried secrets wrapped in ordinary life. When Lucas had first been assigned to watch him, he had expected to find cracks, a hidden business, coded conversations, the faint shadow of guilt in his routine. What he found instead unsettled him more than evidence ever could. In the months before that frozen night at the airport, Lucas had traced Adrian's days with surgical precision. Morning bell at Lincoln High, afternoon tutoring sessions in a library that smelled of chalk and second chances, grocery runs with clipped coupons, evenings spent coaching Noah's Pee-wee soccer team, a boy always running toward him with unfiltered joy. Lucas had expected patterns of crime. He found rituals of care. The spreadsheets never showed the late nights Adrian stayed grading essays until his eyes ached. They never showed him slipping granola bars into his bag so Noah would have snacks on field trips. Lucas kept looking for masks, yet every layer revealed the same thing: an exhausted but gentle man holding his world together with threadbare hands. That memory replayed as he watched them from 2 rows back on the morning flight out of Denver. Snow still clung to the wings, light glinting off it like shards of glass. Noah was perched by the window, giggling as Adrian sketched animals on the condensation, their laughter forming a small island of warmth in the sterile cabin. Lucas sat rigid, notebook open but untouched. The smell of jet fuel and recycled air pressed around him, but all he felt was the quiet ache in his chest. He remembered the way Adrian had wrapped Noah in his arms the night before when the boy woke crying from a nightmare. There had been no frustration in his voice, only soft reassurances murmured until Noah's trembling stilled. Lucas had witnessed countless interrogations, seen confessions ripped from people through fear or fatigue. What he saw in Adrian's embrace was something infinitely stronger than fear-love, unguarded and absolute, and it pierced through the armor he had spent years building. Lucas tried to summon the cold logic that had carried him through every assignment. He reminded himself that personal feelings cloud judgment, that empathy had no place in federal investigations. But as he watched Adrian gently ruffle Noah's hair, something fragile and dangerous took root inside him. It wasn't just attraction, it was trust, blooming uninvited, undermining the distance he had sworn to keep. He closed the notebook and slipped it into his briefcase, sealing away the role he was supposed to play. Somewhere deep down, a decision formed, reckless and quiet as falling snow. If Adrian was innocent, then someone else was using his name to wash dirty money, and Lucas would find them. He would clear Adrian's record, not because it was his duty, but because he could no longer bear the thought of this man being crushed by a lie. As the captain's voice droned about altitude and seatbelts, Lucas kept his eyes on the back of Adrian's head, on the way his shoulders eased each time Noah laughed. He realized how easily a system built to protect could also destroy lives caught in its blind spots. Duty could make people forget they were watching humans, not just patterns. Lucas vowed he would not forget, because justice without compassion was just another kind of cruelty, and he was no longer willing to be cruel. Weeks blurred into one another as Lucas Grant sifted through data like a surgeon working through scar tissue. He dissected transaction trails with an obsession that left his apartment in shadows and his phone unanswered. The pattern that had first pointed toward Adrian Cole began to splinter under closer scrutiny. Transfers originated from accounts that mirrored Adrian's details too perfectly, as though forged by someone who had once known every line of his life. Dates lined up with moments Adrian had been teaching or chaperoning Noah's field trips, times when he could not have been moving funds across borders. Lucas followed digital ghosts through banks, tax archives, and courthouse filings until the pieces finally fell into place with a soundless crash. The culprit was Amanda, Adrian's former wife, and the man she had remarried shortly after their divorce. They had used confidential records from the divorce proceedings, Adrian's old routing numbers, his scanned signature, his social security information to open shadow accounts in his name. Through those accounts, they funneled illicit money, confident that if anyone traced the trail, it would lead straight to the quiet teacher too busy raising a child alone to notice the ground eroding beneath him. Lucas stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. The betrayal cut deeper than any case file could capture. Adrian had not just been framed. He had been chosen as a scapegoat precisely because his goodness made him vulnerable. Lucas filed a sealed report naming Amanda and her husband as primary suspects. But he didn't stop there. The protocol said to pass the findings to his unit chief. He chose something else. He booked a flight, pressed his suit, and walked straight into Lincoln High School with the weight of truth burning through him. The hallway smelled faintly of floor polish and teenage urgency. Through a narrow window, he saw Adrian at the front of a classroom, his voice low and steady as he explained a civil rights-era court case. Sunlight caught in his hair. The students were leaning in, eyes bright, pulled by the quiet force of someone who believed knowledge could change lives. When the bell rang and the class spilled out, Adrian stayed behind to stack papers, humming under his breath. He looked up when Lucas entered, and the moment their eyes met, the air seemed to thin. Lucas closed the door, his badge flashing like a wound as he set it on the desk. The words felt heavier than they should have. He told Adrian everything in the investigation, the false accounts, the betrayal woven into the fine print of old divorce records. Adrian's face went still, drained of color, as though gravity had tilted beneath him. His hands hovered over the desk edge like he wasn't sure what to hold on to. Then Lucas said the part he had rehearsed and dreaded. His voice was unsteady, cracking around the edges. He admitted he was supposed to see Adrian as a suspect, a potential criminal, a name on a ledger, but somewhere along the line, he had started seeing him as something else entirely. He said he knew it was wrong to fall for someone he was ordered to distrust, but he had never trusted anyone as fiercely as he now trusted Adrian. Silence filled the room like rising water. Adrian looked at him for a long time, eyes unreadable, until the tension softened by a fraction. He exhaled shakily and spoke not of anger, but of Noah. How the boy still mentioned Lucas at bedtime, calling him the warm-suited man with sleepy reverence. The corner of Adrian's mouth lifted, a fragile attempt at a smile, and it undid Lucas more thoroughly than any confession ever had. In that fragile quiet, something shifted. The case had been about evidence, but what stood before Lucas was proof of something stronger, how easily lives can be broken by systems built to protect them, and how healing sometimes begins when someone chooses to see the person behind the suspicion. The weeks that followed Amanda's arrest felt strangely quiet, as if the storm that had once surrounded Adrian Cole had finally burned itself out. News of her indictment swept briefly through local media, then dissolved, leaving only the faint rustle of gossip in the school hallways. Adrian moved through it all like a man relearning the weight of sunlight. His name was cleared, his accounts restored, the shadow that had followed him gone at last. Yet freedom felt unfamiliar. Years of carrying suspicion he never knew existed had left grooves in his posture, invisible marks he still struggled to smooth away. Lucas Grant remained, though the role he played had changed entirely. He had requested a leave of absence from the Bureau, a decision that baffled his colleagues but made perfect sense to him. The world of cold corridors and coded files could survive without him. Adrian and Noah could not. He began showing up in small ways, slipping into their days like threads of color in a fabric long faded. He arrived at dawn one Saturday with a soccer ball tucked under his arm, coaxing Noah into the park until the boy's laughter rang across the dew-soaked grass. He stood in the kitchen with flour on his suit pants, learning how to braid dough for cinnamon rolls because Noah wanted to surprise his dad. The house, once anchored by Adrian's quiet routines, began to hum with new rhythms. Lucas built a miniature bookshelf for Noah's growing stack of space encyclopedias, though he had to rebuild it twice after the first one collapsed. He joined Adrian in the evenings, sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, helping Noah assemble model rockets until glue stained their fingers. The child who had once curled silently into Lucas's coat at an airport now ran to him full speed after school, arms outstretched. Adrian watched all of it from the edges at first, unsure how to let someone else inside the fragile world he had built. He had spent so many years convinced that single fatherhood made him unworthy of romantic love, as if the devotion he gave to Noah left no room for anyone else. But Lucas didn't ask for space. He carved out his own, gently, steadily, until Adrian realized he had begun looking for him in every room. One evening, after Noah had fallen asleep beneath a blanket of constellations he had taped to the ceiling, Adrian and Lucas lingered in the quiet. The house smelled faintly of soap and warm paper. Lucas sat on the couch with his tie loosened, hair mussed from the boys' endless hugs. His expression soft in a way Adrian had never seen before. Something in Adrian's chest gave way. He crossed the room, sat beside him, and without hesitation, laced their hands together. "I have spent so long surviving," Adrian said quietly, the words more exhale than sound. "Everything I did was for Noah, to keep him safe, to keep him whole. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that I am allowed to be whole too." He turned to Lucas, eyes steady now. "You make me want to protect more than just what I have. You make me want to protect what I feel." Lucas's thumb brushed across his knuckles, slow and reverent, like tracing the outline of something sacred. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't need to. In the stillness, Adrian realized that love had not come to take space from Noah. It had come to give them both more of it. He had feared that opening his heart again would somehow dilute his love for his son, but instead it expanded, reaching for Lucas as naturally as breath. He thought of the history lessons he so often taught, the ones about revolutions born not from power but from hope, and understood at last families are not only inherited, sometimes, they are built from the people brave enough to stay. 6 months later, the world felt almost unrecognizable to Adrian Cole. The years of scraping by, of folding his dreams small so Noah's could have room to grow, had been replaced with something lighter. Almost impossible. Laughter had become the soundtrack of their days. There were still grocery lists taped to the fridge, still half-finished lesson plans on the dining table. But now they lived alongside the thrum of a new heartbeat in their home, Lucas Grant's. That February morning, Denver International Airport looked nothing like the night Adrian first met him. The storm was gone. Sunlight spilled through the enormous glass panes, drenching the concourse in gold. Noah clutched Adrian's hand, eyes sparkling, while his other hand gripped a cardboard sign scribbled in bright marker. Lucas stood a few feet away, impossibly composed in his navy suit, yet Adrian could see the nervous tremor in his jaw, the way his fingers tightened around the small velvet box in his pocket. Travelers flowed around them in a blur of rolling suitcases and boarding calls, but for Adrian, time stilled. This was the place where exhaustion had once wrapped around him like a second skin, where he had believed love was a luxury meant for other people. And here was Lucas, stepping forward through the same space, rewriting its memory with every determined stride. He stopped in front of Adrian and knelt. The terminal fell away the noise, the strangers, the years between who they were and who they had become. Lucas opened the box. Inside, the ring caught the light like a spark of something alive. Noah lifted the sign high above his head. The letters wobbled, uneven and heartfelt. "Chuvest, will you be my second dad?" Adrian's throat tightened. Lucas's voice shook, not with doubt but with awe. He asked Adrian to marry him, his words steady despite the tears already slipping free. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Adrian sank to his knees, pulling Lucas into him with a force that felt like gravity itself had chosen sides. Around them, a ripple of applause rose from strangers who didn't know their story but understood its ending. They left the airport that day not as teacher and agent, not as survivor and protector, but as something new, two men who had chosen each other, and the boy who had chosen them both. Yet destiny had one more thread to reveal. Weeks later, as wedding plans filled the house with ribbons and chaos, a sealed envelope arrived from the bureau. It contained Lucas's declassified background file. Adrian read it alone at the kitchen counter, while Lucas and Noah built another rocket in the yard. The words on the page blurred and sharpened, reshaping everything he thought he knew. Lucas had been a ward of the state as a child, moved through foster homes like luggage no one claimed. And his birth mother, the name leapt from the page like a voice long forgotten, had been Evelyn Hart, Adrian's own former homeroom teacher, the one who had seen something in him when no one else had. She had died years ago, leaving behind nothing but her words. Kindness can save a life. Adrian set the file down, his heart a chaotic ache of wonder. It felt as if Evelyn had reached across time, threading her legacy through the boy she once believed in and the son she never got to raise, binding them into the family she had always hoped existed. Lucas had not just stumbled into their lives, it says, he had been carried there, piece by piece, by love that refused to vanish. When Adrian stepped outside, Lucas looked up from the grass, hair wind-tossed, Noah laughing in his arms, and Adrian understood this was never coincidence. This was what destiny looked like when it finally arrived, quiet, unstoppable, and shaped like home. Do you believe some people are meant to find each other no matter what? If you do, comment Destiny and follow Heart Stories to never miss the next story that might change your heart.